Hello, sleepy friend. Tonight, we share the gentle story of Snow White and her 7 small friends. Where in the world are you listening from? Close your eyes and feel the cool night air. Nestle under your covers. Let your pillow hug your head. Breathe in slowly through your nose. Breathe out softly through your mouth. With every breath, let worries drift away. Our calming fairy tale journey begins now, dear listener. Chapter 1. Mirror, Mirror. Night settled over the high stone towers of the castle like a velvet cloak. Torches on the battlements sputtered in the breeze. Up in the tallest wing, behind cedar doors, the queen prepared for her nightly ritual. She moved without a sound, a whisper of silk. First, she unpinned the shining crown from her ebony hair and set it upon a pillow of crimson velvet. Then she blew out every candle but one. The single flame drew trembling orange circles on the walls, narrowing the room to a small island of light. In that dim circle stood the enchanted mirror. The mirror was taller than any grown man and framed in twisting silver vines. No dust dared to gather upon its surface, for the glass was alive with quiet power. Whenever the queen spoke, the mirror listened. Whenever she asked, the mirror answered, and always the mirror spoke the truth. Tonight, as every night, the queen's heart beat a little faster as she stepped toward the glass. Power loves to hear its own name, and beauty loves to be praised. She lifted her chin, placed both pale hands upon the cool frame, and whispered the words that had become both comfort and need. Mirror, mirror, upon the wall, who is the fairest one of all? At first, the glass looked empty, like a still pond under moonlight. Then silver clouds swirled across its face, and out of those clouds a mask appeared, smooth and featureless save for 2 bright eyes of liquid light. The mirror's voice was neither man nor woman, neither old nor young. It was the clear bell note of truth ringing in a silent hall. You, O Queen, it said, were fair in heart and fair in face until this dawn. But now Snow White, your stepdaughter, is the fairest in the land. Her kindness is a light no shadow may dim. The words struck the queen like icy water poured down the spine. For years the mirror had answered her name alone. To hear another, Snow White, gentle Snow White, shone brighter crushed her breath. A spark of jealousy flared in her chest, sharp and hot. She closed her eyes, pretending for one heartbeat that the mirror had lied, that she could simply blow out the candle and step back into yesterday's certainty. But truth does not fade when eyes are shut. When she looked again, the mirror's clouded mask remained, patient and unyielding. The room suddenly felt too small, the single candle too bright. The queen's fingers tightened on the frame until the silver vines creaked under her nails. Snow White, she breathed, tasting the name like bitter wine. Of course it would be Snow White, skin as clear as winter frost, lips like rose petals, eyes that shone with gentle wonder at every star in the sky. People loved her effortlessly, drawn to the warmth she carried as naturally as breathing. The court spoke of nothing but the girl's grace. Visiting lords brought little gifts. Servants smiled just to see her pass. And all the while the queen watched. She watched the sunlight linger in Snow White's hair. She watched her laughter flutter through halls like birds set free. Once, perhaps, she had felt a flicker of affection for the child, back when her crown was new and hope still sat easily on her shoulders. Yet each year the mirror reminded her that beauty was a throne, and thrones allow only one ruler. Now someone else had taken that throne. Beauty had drifted to Snow White like a banner changing hands. The queen's jealousy, born as a spark, leapt into flame, then into cold, bright steel. She spun away from the mirror and strode to the velvet rope beside the door. With a single tug, she rang a bell deep in the guardroom. Moments later, the door creaked open and the royal huntsman stepped inside. The huntsman was a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a braid of brown hair down his back. Snow White often fed stray dogs beside him in the kennels. He came now in simple leather, smelling faintly of pine. Bowing low, he waited for the queen to speak. "Come closer," she said. Her voice was soft, but edges of frost lurked beneath each syllable. He obeyed, crossing the room to stand beneath the mirror's tall shadow. The candlelight flickered across his honest face. "There is a task I require tonight," the queen began, moving to face him directly. "A task that demands both your skill in the forest and your silence afterward." The huntsman met her gaze with steady calm. "Your Majesty has but to command." She took a slow breath. Even now, speaking her plan scraped her throat. It must be done. The mirror's truth allowed no mercy. "Take Snow White beyond the farthest glade at dawn," she said. "Pretend you are gathering wildflowers. She will go gladly. Then, when you stand alone among the trees, drive your dagger into her heart." The huntsman's eyes widened, color drained from his sun-browned cheeks. He opened his mouth to protest, but the queen raised one gloved hand. "I will accept no refusal," she hissed. "Bring me her heart in that black oak box." She gestured to a polished casket on a nearby table. "So I may be certain the deed is done." Silence spread between them like spilled ink. Somewhere a nightbird cried through an open window. The huntsman's throat worked. He had tracked wolves and felled great stags, but never had blood run so cold as this command. He thought of Snow White offering him an apple only yesterday, laughing when juice dripped down her chin. He thought of her thanking him for showing her the secret path where violets grew. "My queen," he said carefully, "the princess is but a child of gentle soul." "A child who outshines me," the queen snapped. In the candle's lonely glow, her eyes glittered like shards of broken glass. "Obey, and I reward you with gold. Fail, and death will fall upon not only you, but every life you cherish." The huntsman felt the room grow colder, as though winter had crept through cracks in the stone. He looked to the mirror, but it offered no counsel. Its clouds lay still. At last he bowed his head. "I obey." The queen watched him pick up the oak box, its silver latch winking in the low light. He clutched it as though it weighed 1,000 stones. Without another word, he turned and left. The door closed with a final thud that echoed down the corridor. Left alone in the corridor, the huntsman paused beneath a stained glass window, glowing with moonlight. He pressed the oak box to his chest and felt its edges bite into his palms. Could he raise a blade against the gentle princess? The forest offered many secrets, perhaps even a path to mercy his queen would never trace. For a moment, the queen stood very still, hands pressed to her chest, feeling her heart race like thunder under lace. She had done it. The order was given. Snow White would walk into the forest at dawn and never return. Yet even as cold resolve settled around her shoulders, the queen heard a faint whisper in her thoughts, an echo of the mirror's words. Her kindness is a light no shadow may dim. Could the mirror's impossible truth haunt her even when Snow White lay still? She shook the doubt away like snow from a cloak. Crossing the room once more, she faced the glass. She leaned close until her breath fogged the silver surface. In the wavering candlelight, she did not ask her nightly question, for she already knew the answer she wanted. Instead, she murmured, "Soon, I will reign alone again." The mirror did not speak. It seemed to watch her with its blank, glowing eyes, storing her promise deep within its ancient memory. Outside, the castle slept, unaware of the darkness gathering at its heart. A pale ribbon of dawn waited beyond the mountains, ready to spill light over the kingdom. Somewhere in her chamber, the queen blew out the last candle. Darkness claimed everything. Far below, Snow White dreamed peacefully of a garden full of roses and laughing doves. She did not know that envy sharpened a cruel path toward her. Nor did she know that within the huntsman's trembling hands lay both a box for her heart and the faint possibility of mercy. Night ticked away its final minutes. Soon, boots would tread the mossy trails of the looming forest. Soon, choices would be carved into the hearts of those who walked beneath ancient branches. Soon, the queen's desire for unchallenged beauty would set in motion a story that would echo far beyond the castle walls. For jealousy, once awakened, is a restless beast. It prowls in the shadows of the soul, seeking to devour all that stands in its way. And tonight, within the silent tower, the beast had been set free. Chapter 2. Flight into the Forest. The first gray light of morning slipped over the castle roofs as Snow White followed the huntsman through a narrow gate and down a dew-damp path. She thought they were searching for meadow flowers to place in the great hall, as he had gently suggested. His boots were silent on the moss, yet his shoulders seemed heavier than usual, as if some unseen weight pressed them down. Above the treetops, a lone crow called once, and then fell quiet, and that hush made Snow White draw closer to her guide. When they reached a ring of ancient pines, the huntsman stopped. He turned, eyes bright with fear and sorrow. One rough hand took hers, the other clutched the wicked dagger he had hidden under his cloak. His voice was only a breath. "Forgive me," he whispered. "The queen ordered your death, but I cannot harm a heart so kind. Run, child, deeper into the forest, where her spies will never find you. Do not return to the castle. Do not even look back. Live." He thrust a small pouch of berries and nuts into her hands, then pushed her lightly away. Before she could speak, he spun and hurried toward the rocky ridge, seeking a wild boar's heart to fool the queen's silver box. Snow White's pulse pounded in her ears. The earth seemed to tilt beneath her feet. For one frozen moment, she stared at the dark wall of trees ahead. Then terror snapped her free, and she fled into the forest. Branches slapped at her sleeves, roots twisted under fallen leaves. She ran until the daylight was swallowed and only shadows remained, cold and breathing. Every sound felt alive. Twigs cracked like bones. Wind hissed through evergreen needles. A distant echo, perhaps a fox's bark, perhaps the hunting horn of murder, spiraled in the air. Snow White pressed on, heart hammering. Her shoes, made for castle corridors, slipped on damp stones. When she stumbled, ferns brushed her cheeks like cold fingers. Once, a crooked oak loomed suddenly ahead, and its gnarled limbs looked like outstretched claws. She cried out and changed course, tears blurring her sight. Time lost meaning under the dense canopy. Fear painted monstrous faces on every hollow stump. The forest seemed a living thing intent on swallowing her. Tiny beads of rain began to fall, stirring the scent of wet soil. In that dim half-light, she imagined the queen's rage spreading like poison smoke, reaching even here. Snow White clutched her pouch of food, yet felt no hunger, only the raw need to keep moving. At last, her strength failed. She dropped beside a fallen log, breath coming in ragged gasps. She wrapped her arms around her knees, shaking. "I am alone," she whispered, though speaking made the truth sting sharper. The forest answered with murmurs, rustling leaves, trickling water, sounds too soft to name yet too constant to ignore. She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. A sudden flick of color drew her gaze. A robin hopped near, head tilted as if studying her sadness. Behind it patted a young fawn, legs still knobby, nose lifting to catch her scent. Snow White held perfectly still, afraid to frighten them. But the animals did not flee. The robin fluttered close enough that she felt the breeze of its wings. The fawn sniffed her skirt and blinked gentle brown eyes. Something warm sparked in her chest. Hope. Small, but bright. More creatures emerged between trunks. A pair of gray squirrels, whiskers twitching, a badger with shiny black eyes, even a timid hedgehog who curled for a moment, then uncurled when it felt no threat. They formed a wide, quiet circle around her, as though the forest itself had shifted from menace to welcome. Snow White exhaled slowly. "You are not afraid of me," she murmured. "Perhaps I should not fear you, either." The robin chirped twice, hopped forward, and flitted toward a barely visible path lined in soft moss. It paused, looked back. Snow White rose uncertainly. "Do you want me to follow?" she asked. The robin's answer was another bright trill before it darted ahead again. Squirrels bounded after it. The fawn trotted behind. Snow White stepped onto the path, trusting the small guide who had found her. The way proved kinder than the one she had forced in panic. Roots arched like sleeping snakes but did not trip her. Stones lay firm beneath her steps. A little stream appeared, its water clear enough to see rounded pebbles and darting minnows. Snow White knelt, cupped cool water to her lips, and felt life return to her throat. The animals drank beside her, unafraid. She opened the pouch the huntsman had given, hazelnuts, dried cherries, slices of sweet apple, and shared the food. Tiny paws brushed her palms, and her tears this time were gentle ones. As they traveled, night melted slowly. A silver glow hinted through needled boughs. Birds began to sing, not shrill but soft, as though they hummed lullabies for dawn. Snow White no longer ran. She walked, listening to her breath and the hush of furry feet. She noticed bright green shoots pushing up through last year's leaves and pale mushrooms shaped like tiny umbrellas. Even the air felt different, damp but sweet, smelling of pine resin and new grass. Soon the trees thinned just enough for morning light to drizzle through. Golden shafts sparkled on spiderwebs stretched between twigs. A line of wild violets painted the ground purple. Snow White sighed, relief washing over her like warm rainfall. Behind her lay the darkest part of the forest, and with it, the Queen's Reach. Ahead, promise gleamed in every sunlit droplet. She touched the fawn's head in thanks. It nuzzled her hand, then bounded away with sudden joy. At the crest of a gentle rise, she paused. Soft rays poured across a small open meadow ringed in birches. Beyond, tucked against a rocky hill, she thought she spied a tiny rooftop, too small for a farmhouse yet too neat to be a hunter's shack. Smoke curled from a chimney in lazy swirls, white as morning clouds. The robin perched on her shoulder, chirped once, and flew toward that rooftop, leaving no doubt of its message. Snow White pressed her fingers to her heart. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty air, whether to the huntsman, the guiding creatures, or the forest itself. She drew one steady breath, then another, remembering the calm the introduction to last night's story had taught her. One step, then a second. She started toward the little house. Each footfall felt lighter than the last. The forest behind her still held shadows, but ahead basked in sunrise gold. Through narrow windows of birch leaves, she saw the sky bloom pink, then pale blue. Somewhere safe and unseen, the huntsman prayed his mercy had saved her. Somewhere farther, the Queen waited beside a silver box for a heart that would never be Snow White's. Yet in this clear morning moment, Snow White allowed herself no dread, only gratitude. The worst night of her young life had also shown her unexpected kindness, from a trembling hunter who could not kill, and from a wild world that chose to guide rather than harm. She raised her face to the warmth of day, whispered a promise to be brave, and followed the robin toward whatever waited in the bright clearing beyond. Chapter 3. A Curious Cottage. Snow White followed the red-breasted robin down a gentle slope, glad to leave the darkest trees behind. The meadow glistened with morning dew, each grass tip shining like glass beads beneath the sun. A breeze carried the scent of warm earth and wild thyme, and with every breath her racing heart slowed. At the far edge of the clearing, the bird dove beneath a low arch of saplings. Snow White ducked after it and stopped, wide-eyed, before the strangest little dwelling she had ever seen. The cottage stood scarcely taller than she did. Round river stones, stacked with loving care, made its walls, and toy-sized red shingles covered the roof. A crooked chimney puffed a single thread of cedar-scented smoke. Window boxes overflowed with purple violets, and a blue front door, perfectly round, bore a brass knob no larger than a walnut. Everything suggested welcome, yet everything was impossibly small, as though a picture book illustration had slipped into the waking world. She lifted the latch on a pint-sized gate, ducked beneath a wind chime fashioned from silver spoons, and tapped at the door. No voice answered. Curiosity, twined with gratitude for shelter, won out over shy caution. She turned the knob and stepped inside. A single sunbeam streamed through a high window, lighting motes of dust that danced in slow spirals above a wooden table ringed by 7 little chairs. Each chair was carved differently, acorns on one, pickaxes on another, music notes, pine trees, suns, even a smiling face, and not one reached higher than her knee. The rest of the room matched the chairs in cheerful variety. On one wall hung 7 bright jackets: crimson, saffron, moss, indigo, cocoa, cream, and dove gray, with matching pointed boots lined neatly beneath. A tiny fireplace crackled, its flames licking a copper kettle that hissed fragrant steam. Shelves bulged with mismatched dishes, plain clay bowls beside delicate porcelain teacups painted with blue daisies. Snow White brushed a finger over a saucer no bigger than her palm and marveled at the care in every detail. Through a stubby archway she discovered the sleeping room, 7 beds in a tidy row, each scarcely longer than her forearm. Patchwork quilts covered them, one of stars, one of evergreen boughs, one of bright suns. Embroidered on tiny pillows were names in neat stitches: Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, Dopey. Seeing the names made her smile despite the night she had fled. Whoever these owners were, they loved color, order, and perhaps a touch of mischief. A pantry half her height sat beyond the beds. Baskets overflowed with sweet onions, carrots, and glossy red apples. Jars of honey, blackberry jam, and pickled beets lined the shelves. Little sacks of flour were tied with twine. A rolling pin, hardly longer than a breadstick, lay beside a cloverleaf biscuit cutter. Snow White recognized the pieces of a complete, comfortable life, scaled to its tiny keepers yet lovingly maintained. Her mother had once taught that gratitude begins with helpful hands. After the terror of the Queen's command, the neat comfort of this cottage felt like mercy itself. "If I tidy and cook," she murmured to the robin perched on the sill, "perhaps I can thank them properly." The bird chirped approval. Rolling up her sleeves, she began to work. First, she flung back the curtains so sun chased every lingering shadow. She swept the floor with a broom that barely reached her waist, laughing at the odd bird-eye view of the room. On the mantel, she dusted a parade of carved wooden animals: bear, deer, rabbit, fox, raccoon, squirrel, owl, each wearing a painted hat. She polished them until their eyes gleamed. In the kitchen nook, she sorted dishes by type and mended a cracked saucer with soft beeswax shaved from a candle stub. From the pantry, she chose potatoes, carrots, and onions, washing them in a basin no wider than a pie plate. Slicing vegetables with a dwarf-sized knife required patience, so she hummed a lullaby to keep her cuts even. Behind the door hung a slate recipe board. One inscription read, "Hearty evening stew, feed 7 and a friend." The friendliness of the words warmed her like a hug. The copper kettle welcomed her vegetables, a pinch of salt, crushed thyme, and a generous spoon of honey for sweetness. Soon, savory steam curled through the room. While the stew bubbled, she carried the colored jackets outside, rinsed them in a wooden tub, and hung them from low apple branches to dry. A breeze fluttered the sleeves like cheerful flags, and she polished each little boot until it caught noon sunlight. By the time the stew thickened and the jackets dried, her limbs ached pleasantly. She matched every bowl to its chair pattern and ladled hearty stew into each, laying a slice of honey-brushed apple beside. Contentment settled over her shoulders like a soft shawl. Outside, a badger shuffled past, nose twitching appreciatively. A gray squirrel gathered petals that drifted from the apple tree. All felt peacefully right. Before surrendering to rest, Snow White read the embroidered names again. Doc sounded wise, a bearded fellow peering over round spectacles. Grumpy might scowl, yet surely soften once honeyed stew touched his tongue. Happy would laugh loud enough to rattle the tin plates, while Sleepy, she felt sure, would forgive her borrowing his quilt. Bashful might peek from behind a collar, Sneezy would keep a kerchief handy, and Dopey, perhaps the youngest, would clap with delight at drifting fireflies. Imagining such company lifted her heart. For the first time since fleeing the castle, she felt anticipation for new friendship rather than fear of old danger. Weariness, at last, pressed her eyelids. She set a lid over the remaining stew, wiped flour dust from the table, and padded into the bedchamber. The quilts were too short, of course, so she gently pushed 3 beds, Happy, Bashful, and Sleepy, together and spread the sun quilt across them. Cedar shavings in the mattress released a calming, woodsy scent. She knelt by the little beds, whispering gratitude to her unseen hosts and to the forest that had guided her. Climbing onto her makeshift couch of quilts, she sighed as every muscle relaxed. Through the window, she watched the sky turn afternoon gold and heard a distant thock, 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 perhaps tiny pickaxes striking stone in a hidden gem mine. She pictured 7 short figures whistling in time, unaware of the guest awaiting them. The patchwork quilt tucked beneath her chin like a promise. The robin on the sill tucked its head under one wing. Beneath the window, a rabbit nestled in tall grass, ears at ease. The fire's last pop, the hush of leaves, and her own slow breathing wove a lullaby. Lashes fluttered once, twice, and closed. Sleep, gentle and deep, gathered her into welcome arms. Outside, shadows shifted, measuring the hours until dusk. The stew cooled by degrees, its perfume lingering in the warm room. 7 little chairs, bowls steaming softly, seemed to smile in the quiet. And Snow White, who had fled envy's blade and found refuge, slept in peace across 3 tiny beds, unaware of the wonder and friendship that twilight would soon lead through the blue door behind her. Chapter 4. The Seven Dwarfs Return. A coral-pink sunset rested on the mountain crests when a jaunty melody drifted between the pines. It began as a single whistle, bright as a lark, then swelled into 7 strong voices keeping happy time. Hi-ho, it's home from work we go. The song wove through mossy trunks, bounced off granite boulders, and floated toward the Curious Cottage where Snow White still slept. With the steady crunch of boots came the clink of tiny pickaxes and the jingle of lunch pails half full of gemstones. At the head of the line marched Doc, round spectacles glinting in the low light, beard tucked tidy beneath a red suspenders strap. Close behind, stumped grumpy brows nodded, muttering that the spring gnats had bitten worse than black flies in July. Happy trundled along third, cheeks glowing like twin apples, while Sleepy ambled beside him, lids drooping despite the lively tune. Bashful kept near the center, hat brim pulled low. Sneezy sniffled at the tail, each breath threatening another thunderous "Achoo!" And bringing up the rear bounced Dopey, hat too long, boots unlaced, tapping every tree trunk he passed just to hear the hollow thunk. They burst from shadow into the clearing and halted. Smoke, new smoke, rose straight from their chimney. Lamps they had doused that morning now glimmered behind curtains. Doc blinked. "That fire was out when we left. I'm certain sure," he said. Grumpy planted fists on hips. "Told you we ought to put a lock on the door. Folks'll wander off the main trail, eat our victuals, and swipe our gems." "No one would steal from us," Happy assured, but his voice held a thread of doubt. Dopey pointed at the washing line. 7 jackets danced in the breeze, cleaner and brighter than they had looked in months. The dwarfs stared as though the garments were ghosts. "Someone's been within our clothes," Doc concluded, words colliding in his hurry. "And cooking too by the smell." Indeed, the sweet scent of honey-glazed stew rolled from the windows like an invisible ribbon. Grumpy's nose twitched. "Well, we'll soon see who's bold enough to barge in," he grumbled, and they crept to the round blue door. Doc raised a cautioning hand. "Quiet now. No telling if it's friend or foe." He eased the latch. The door swung without a squeak. The cottage welcomed them with golden lamplight and the savory perfume of supper. The 7 filed in, weapons ready, pickaxes, shovels, a half-sharpened chisel, then froze. Their table was set perfect. 7 steaming bowls, 7 shining spoons, 7 slices of honeyed apple curved like smiles. Boots and jackets hung in neat order. The mantel gleamed. The floor could have been a mirror. Grumpy's jaw dropped so wide that Happy had to nudge it shut. "Looks better than when we left," Bashful whispered, cheeks coloring. Doc stroked his beard. A tidy bandit? Makes no scientific sense." Sneezy sniffed deeply and promptly rattled a sneeze so loud the spoons rattled. Chew! The steam from the bowls puffed in reply. From the sleeping room came a soft rustle, then silence. Doc signaled, and the dwarfs tiptoed over, boots squeaking on the scrubbed boards. Lamplight revealed 3 beds pushed together, quilts lumped into one cozy hill. Upon that hill lay a girl with skin like fresh snow and hair dark as midnight. She breathed quietly, lashes still damp from some earlier dream. A robin perched on the sill kept watch. "Well, I'll be pickaxed," murmured Doc. "An intruder," hissed Grumpy, though his voice wavered. Happy pressed palms to plump cheeks. "She's pretty as a sugar plum." Dopey stretched to poke the quilt, but Bashful gently pulled him back. They gathered in a semicircle, staring as though at a priceless gem brought to life. Doc cleared his throat in a kindly rumble. "Young miss." He touched her shoulder no heavier than a falling leaf. "Pardon the interruption, but you're in our humble abode." Snow White stirred. The quilt slipped, and she blinked into lantern glow. For half a breath her heart leapt. Was it the Queen's huntsman? But the faces bent above her were earnest, bearded, and small. She sat up slowly, brushing hair from her face. "Oh, good evening," she whispered, remembering to keep her voice gentle. "I must seem terribly rude, sleeping in your beds." The dwarf stepped back in surprise. It was not often a stranger greeted them with courtesy. Doc bowed, hat touching the floor. "We're the 7 dwarfs at your service. Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and..." He gestured. Dopey waved 2 floppy sleeves in lieu of words. Snow White inclined her head to each name. "I am Snow White." When she spoke, something tender stirred in the room, like the hush before dawn bird song. Grumpy crossed arms. "Snow White? The princess?" Snow White's smile faltered. "Yes, but please call me simply Snow White. Her voice snagged on memory. "I was forced to flee the castle." She folded trembling hands. "Your home's warmth felt like safety. I cleaned and cooked to repay your unknowing kindness. I hope I have not offended you." Happy's laugh rang clear. "Offended? We've never returned to a neater hearth." Sleepy stifled a yawn. "Or supper already set." Bashful peeked from under his cap. "Thank you," he mumbled, face the shade of crabapple blossom. Grumpy humped, though even he could not hide how the smell of stew softened his temper. "Well, we ought to eat before the victuals go cold. Questions after." Doc nodded sagely. Sound medical advice. He offered Snow White a small hand. Join us, dear lady, if you please. She slipped from the beds, careful not to jar the quilts. Around the table, the dwarfs scurried to chairs. Doc gestured for Snow White to take his place at the head. She folded onto the stool, knees bent like a grasshopper, feeling both honored and sheepish. They bowed heads. Doc muttered a short grace thanking mountains for gems, trees for wood, and unknown friends for unexpected company. Then spoons clinked in unison. A hush, broken by hums of pleasure, fell over the table. The dwarfs' eyes widened as stew warmed their bellies. Grumpy tried to maintain a frown, but half a bowl later it melted into a grudging grin. Dopey licked the spoon handle by accident, then shrugged and kept right on. Mid-meal. Sneezy's face twitched. Snow White noticed, lifted her napkin. Here, good Sneezy. He seized it just as, "Ah-choo!" thundered. Apples rattled, lantern flame flickered. Snow White only smiled and poured him more cider. The dwarfs exchanged impressed looks. Rare were guests who met Sneezy's gale and kept their seats. When bowls were scraped clean, Happy leaned back, palms on belly. That was the best stew this side of sunrise. Doc adjusted spectacles. Now, about your fleeing, Miss Snow White. She told her tale, the queen's sudden jealousy, the mirror's verdict, the huntsman's mercy, her night of terror, and the guiding animals that led her to the bright little house. As she spoke, shadows from the hearth waltzed across log walls, and the dwarfs listened so intently the kettle's hiss sounded loud. Grumpy smacked the table. Blasted vanity, a heart's no payment for beauty. Bashful wrung his cap. Poor princess, he whispered. Sleepy's eyes drooped, but he shook himself awake. We can't send her back. Doc pushed knuckles into beard. Morally impermissible, indeed. Dopey mimed drawing a sword, then hiding it behind his back in protection. Snow White swallowed. I will leave at dawn if my being here endangers you. I could find deeper forest. Happy interrupted with a laugh like bells. No, stay, we're minors, not cowards. But the queen's reach is long, she warned. Grumpy jabbed a finger at the window. Let her reach into these mountains. We know every squirrel track. She'll lose her fancy slippers on the first scree slope. Doc nodded firm. We 7 stand stronger than one jealous queen. He looked around the circle. Friends, shall we vow? A pact of protection. The dwarfs rose, boots scuffing. Sleepy shook himself fully awake. Bashful straightened shoulders. Sneezy pinched his nose to stave off another blast. Dopey pulled a shiny emerald from his pocket and placed it on the table as token. Snow White's eyes misted. Doc lifted his pickaxe like a scepter. We, the 7 dwarfs, pledge this hearth and all within to the safety of Snow White. Any foe must face our combined courage. One by one, they tapped pickaxe heads or clenched fists to hearts. Even Grumpy's voice softened. Cross my beard. Snow White pressed a hand over her heart. And I, Snow White, promise to care for this home as if it were my own and cherish each of you, my dear friends. So the pact was forged, not in quartz or scrolls, but beside a crackling fire, sealed with kindness, stew, and the soft swipe of Dopey's sleeve catching a tear before it fell. Lanterns were snuffed one by one until only hearth glow remained. Snow White helped stack bowls in the wash basin. Bashful shyly offered to pump water. Happy hummed hi-ho at half speed, a lullaby version. When the chores were done, Snow White arranged the 3 beds again. Take mine, offered Sleepy with a yawn, but she shook her head. You worked all day. I'll be cozy enough across these. The dwarfs fetched an extra quilt, patches of tiny gemstones stitched into stars, and tucked it to her chin. Before climbing into his own tiny bed, Doc patted her hand. Rest easy, princess. No evil shall cross this threshold tonight. Outside, night deepened. scattering diamonds across the sky. Inside, 7 breathing patterns, some steady, some snoring, one soft whistle, joined Snow White's gentle sigh, weaving a blanket of sound over the cottage. The queen, miles away, believed darkness complete. But in this hidden glen, light glowed in small hearts, bright as ember sparks, waiting to flare into courage should danger knock. And so, under a humble roof of river stones and red shingles, a new family was born. 7 miners of merry hearts, and 1 princess brave enough to trust them. Their pact flickered in the hearth like hope itself, promising that even in the deepest forest, friendship could make the night feel like dawn. Chapter 5. A New Home Life. The first blush of dawn painted the cottage windows rose gold, and inside the tiny rooms hummed with cheerful energy. Snow White stretched beneath her patchwork quilt, then slipped onto the floorboards so lightly the dwarfs did not stir. She coaxed the kettle to life, fed the hearth with a pine log, and opened the shutters. Cool mountain air rushed in, scented with spruce and early jasmine. One by one, the dwarfs awoke to the soft hiss of oatmeal bubbling and the buttery smell of griddle cakes. Doc blinked behind his spectacles. Grumpy muttered about eye-stinging sunrise. Happy burst into song. Sleepy rubbed sand from his lashes. Bashful colored pink when Snow White wished him good morning. Sneezy reached for his kerchief, and Dopey attempted to balance 2 stacked cups until they toppled with a clatter. Laughter filled the kitchen. First Snow White's silver giggle, then the dwarfs' deeper chortles, weaving together like birdsong over a brook. Breakfast became their first daily ritual. Snow White served steaming bowls, and the dwarfs added garnets of wild raspberries gathered on yesterday's hike home. Between bites, Doc unfurled a parchment map of the gem tunnels planned for excavation, tapping spots where new veins of rubies might glimmer. Grumpy grumbled that loose gravel would cave in before they drilled 2 feet. Happy countered with a grin that the cave-ins would uncover gold, and Sneezy punctuated the debate with an enormous "ah-choo" that rattled the cutlery. Dopey mimed the avalanche sound effect, sending them into fresh peals of laughter. When breakfast dishes were stacked, the second ritual began. The whistle while you work chores. Snow White knotted a scarlet kerchief over her hair, while Happy struck the opening note on a tiny harmonica. Instantly, the cottage transformed into a merry clockwork. Grumpy hauled split logs, Bashful polished lanterns, Sneezy dusted shelves between fits of peppery explosions, and Dopey swept floors with such exuberance that dust clouds floated like dandelion fluff. Snow White washed windows, humming above the rhythm of boots and bristles. Sunbeams caught the spray and painted small rainbows on the walls. Dopey chased them, hat flapping, until Sleepy, mopping in slow circles, nearly knotted into the suds. Doc called time, and all 7 miners lined up for inspection. Floors shone, beds stood crisp, jackets hung in color order. Snow White clapped softly, proud to see teamwork sparkle brighter than any sapphire. Next came goodbyes. Snow White walked the dwarfs to the gate, basket of lunch parcels on her arm. She sang a gentle lullaby, voice low and even, a tune her mother once sang to calm restless foals in the royal stables. The melody floated after the dwarfs as they set off toward the mine trail, pickaxes swinging like metronomes. Doc smiled back over his shoulder, and Grumpy, after checking no one watched, returned a quick salute. Snow White's song faded only when their colorful caps vanished beyond the ridge. Left alone, she turned to the day's quietly heroic tasks, yet she was never truly alone. At her whistle, woodland creatures arrived with the punctuality of palace footmen. Bluebirds tugged laundry lines taut, squirrels ferried clothespins, a badger waddled barrels of wash water, rabbits gathered carrot tops for stew stock. Even the shy hedgehog appeared to supervise crumbs sweeping beneath the cupboards. Snow White moved among them like a gentle conductor, humming directions rather than giving orders. The animals seemed to understand instinctively. They plunged tiny paws into sudsy tubs, sorted sock sizes, and arranged spice tins by scent. By noon, shirts flapped bright against sapphire skies and the pantry shelves gleamed. When the chores were done, Snow White set dough to rise for supper pies. One savory with thyme and root vegetables, one sweet with late summer blackberries. Awaiting the dough's swell, she stepped outside, skirts brushing lavender tufts. Birdsong threaded through pine needles overhead, and a brook nearby chuckled over pebbles. She knelt to fill a wooden pail, glimpsing her reflection, cheeks sun-kissed, eyes calmer than the day she fled. Yet sometimes a shadow crossed her thoughts, the queen's mirror, the huntsman's sorrowful warning. In those moments she pressed a hand to her chest and felt comfort in the memory of 7 small vows spoken around the hearth. Afternoon drifted into early evening. The animals dispersed to nests and burrows, and the cottage settled into expectant silence. Snow White rolled pie crusts on the flour-dusted table, carving leaf patterns along the edges. She stirred a bubbling pot of vegetable stew, adding a spoonful of honey, just as Doc liked. The room filled with aromas that promised warmth against the descending chill. At twilight, the familiar marching chorus returned, boot crunch, pickaxe clink, and a robust hi-ho. The blue door burst open to reveal faces smudged with coal soot and eyes shining with discovery. Dopey brandished a fist-sized topaz. Doc carried a leather pouch of tiny emerald chips, and Happy hoisted a quartz crystal that sprayed rainbow shards across the ceiling lamp. Grumpy claimed nothing but an aching back, though Snow White spotted a glimmer of silver ore peeking from his pocket. They washed at the rain barrel while she fetched towels. Supper commenced amid spirited storytelling, Sleepy describing almost falling into a crystal pool before Doc yanked him back by the suspenders. Bashful admitting, through much stammering, he'd found a pretty pair of geodes shaped like hearts but hid them because they looked private. Sneezy proclaiming that dust in the amethyst tunnel tickled his nose worse than a patch of thistles, and unleashing 3 explosive sneezes for emphasis. Snow White listened, passing plates and dabbing Sneezy's eyes with linen. Laughter rose louder than the crackling logs, bounced off stone walls, and seeped into corners as if trying to stay forever. When bowls lay empty and pie plates showed only sticky crumbs, they gathered by the hearth for night's final ritual, storytelling. Sometimes Doc recited pages from a worn book of mountain lore. Other nights, Happy invented tales so wild that Dopey nearly rolled off his stool laughing. This evening, Snow White was coaxed to speak first. She recounted a childhood memory of the palace library roof, how, one crisp winter night, she crept up to watch a meteor shower brighten the snow-blanketed gardens, each falling star mirrored by 1,000 diamond-bright flakes. Her voice turned soft as she described wishing for a place where kindness warms even the coldest wind. The dwarfs listened, eyes reflecting the fire's glow and the hush of gratitude. Grumpy surprised them by clearing his throat and telling a story of his own. He described the day he and his brothers settled this very glen, how they nearly gave up when the first mine shaft flooded, and how they swore never to abandon each other, no matter how rough the granite. When he finished, silence held for a beat, deep and gentle. Happy clapped him on the shoulder, and Grumpy pretended to bat the hand away, though a smile tugged his beard. Snow White felt something bloom inside, larger than gratitude, deeper than relief. The cottage walls, though tiny, seemed to stretch, making room for a sense of belonging she had never known in the echoing marble halls of the castle. Here, no one measured worth by reflection in a mirror. Here, value shone in shared labor, in golden pies and coal dust smudges, in the nightly quilt that tucked 7 small figures under stars. Before bed, they performed one last wordless custom. Each dwarf chose a single gem from that day's haul and placed it on the mantelpiece. Doc's emerald chip, Happy's crystal rainbow shard, Bashful's shy heart geode, Dopey's lopsided topaz, Sleepy's half-polished sapphire he'd almost napped upon, Sneezy's smoky quartz that sparkled when he sneezed near it, and Grumpy's reluctant silver ore. Snow White added something too, not a gemstone, but a sprig of flowering thyme from the window box, its scent mingling with pine smoke. 8 treasures glimmered together, humble and radiant. Sleep tugged at their eyelids. Snow White rearranged 3 beds for herself once more. But tonight, Sleepy insisted she take his spot, claiming he could snooze just as well on the settle. She accepted only after promising to rise early and bake cinnamon rolls to sweeten their breakfast shift. Lamp wicks were pinched. Darkness rested gently upon the roof. As Snow White lay beneath the gemstone star quilt, she listened to the steady breathing around her. Doc's rhythmic puffs, Grumpy's occasional grumble, Happy's snicker mid-dream, Sleepy's faint whistle, Bashful's shy sigh, Sneezy's quiet pre-sneeze hitches that never quite materialized, Dopey's contented hum. She smiled into the darkness. Outside, moonlight silvered the apple leaves, and the robin kept vigil on the windowsill. Far away, in a tower lit by a single cold candle, the queen might still be counting days by mirrors and malice. But here, time was measured in sweeter ways: the rise of bread dough, the length of a morning's song, the sparkle of evenings when stories outshone the fire. Snow White closed her eyes, heart beating to a new rhythm, not of fear, but of belonging. Beneath a roof of river stones and red shingles, she had found a family stitched together by laughter, chores, and unwavering promises. And as sleep carried her toward dawn, she dreamt not of fleeing dark woods, but of planting a garden behind the cottage, of teaching Dopey to dance without tripping, of hearing Grumpy laugh without restraint. Most of all, she dreamt of the simple miracle she already held: that in a world threaded with envy and peril, love could still gather in small, bright pockets and glow like embers, keeping even the deepest forest warm. Chapter 6. The Peddler's Laces. Deep inside her tower chamber, the queen stood alone before a cauldron as black as midnight ice. Moonlight spilled through a narrow window, staining the flagstones silver. With every bubble that rose, the air thickened, sharp with hemlock, bitter with iron shavings, and sweet with stolen rose petals. She worked without pause, stoking embers beneath the pot while whispering words older than the castle itself. Each ingredient carried purpose: a whisper of wolf fur for cunning, a raven's feather for disguise, 3 grains of poppy for sleep, and 1 tear she forced from her own eye for hatred, made liquid. When the brew turned the color of bruised plums, the queen plunged an ivory comb through her hair, severing a single black lock. It hissed as it touched the brew, curling like dark smoke before dissolving. Lightning flickered beyond the lattice. Thunder grumbled approval. At last she dipped a wooden ladle, scooped a small portion, and poured it into a crystal flask. The potion glimmered, restless. Holding it aloft, she spoke to the silent mirror on the wall. "My beauty is threatened," she vowed, "so I shall walk unknown and end the threat myself." She raised the flask to her lips and drank every drop. Pain sliced through bone and sinew, her spine bent, shoulders hunched, fingers gnarled like old roots. Skin sagged and mottled, hair drained its luster, turning snow white, then dull gray. When the pain faded, the tall queen had vanished. In her place stooped a ragged peddler woman wrapped in patchwork shawls, eyes watery and small. She gazed into the mirror. The glass reflected not royalty, but age and weakness. Yet deep within her spirit remained razor-sharp. From an oak chest she withdrew a bundle of silken laces, long ribbons dyed in jeweled hues of ruby, emerald, and sapphire. They shimmered with unnatural beauty, for she had soaked them in potion before dawn until the fabric drank every drop. One tug from these laces would press breath from any chest. Smiling a crooked smile, she tucked the bundle into a worn basket, added spools of common thread to hide the treasures, and covered everything with a scrap of linen. Before leaving, she opened a secret panel behind the mirror and lifted a map etched on vellum. A winding path over the northern ridge, through caves, across cliff edges, then down into an anonymous valley, an old smuggler's route known only to the earliest kings. She traced the trail with a twisted finger. "By nightfall tomorrow," she rasped, "I'll stand at her door." So began the queen's dark journey. She crept down back stairs, hood pulled low, passing guards who saw only an elderly mendicant and stepped aside. At the stable, she chose a sway-backed mule, convincing the keeper she needed merely to peddle thread in nearby villages. Riding under moon-washed clouds, she left the castle gates without alarm. Beyond the orchards, the road forked. She turned west, toward the secret pass. The mountain path was cruel. Narrow ledges, loose shale shifting beneath hooves. Bitter wind whipped her shawls, yet fury fueled her steps. Envy steadied her hands. By the next dawn, she reached the summit. Below, mist pooled like milk in the valleys. One valley hid a speck of red shingles, barely visible, but unmistakable to eyes sharpened by obsession. She hissed a breath of triumph. Meanwhile, Snow White greeted a new morning unaware. She woke to birds tapping the glass, wriggled into her blue dress, and tied her scarlet kerchief. Outside, the dwarfs lined up for inspection, boots polished, pickaxes gleaming. Snow White handed each a packet of dried apple slices and sang her lullaby while they marched away, harmonizing with Happy's harmonica. Soon their voices faded into pine murmurs. She turned to chores, joined by her faithful woodland helpers. Squirrels fetched kindling, bluebirds tugged sheets onto the line. By noon, the cottage sparkled, and Snow White began stitching a bright tablecloth as a surprise gift. She hummed softly, lost in thought. Near mid-afternoon, a faint tap came at the gate latch. The rabbit sentinel perked his ears. Snow White peered down the path and saw an old woman hobbling with a basket on her arm. Her shawl was patched, her eyes watery yet kind-looking. Snow White, born of gentle courtesy, hurried to meet her. "Good day, dear Granny," she called. "May I help carry your load?" The disguised queen's voice quavered. "Bless you, child, my bones complain in this mountain air. Might an humble peddler rest a moment in your pretty yard?" "Of course," Snow White said, opening the gate. Bluebirds circled warily, sensing something amiss, but Snow White's heart knew only pity. The old woman tottered to the bench beneath the apple tree. "I travel far selling ribbons and laces to fancy folk," she croaked. "But few fine ladies wander these woods. Perhaps you'd care to see my wares." No coin demanded, just friendly company. Snow White smiled. "How lovely! I plan to mend my bodice ties." She sat beside the basket. With trembling hands, the peddler drew out the silken laces. They gleamed like liquid jewels. Snow White gasped softly. Never had she touched such silk, smooth as water, light as breath. "Try one," coaxed the peddler. "Let me lace it around your slender waist. My old eyes can judge a perfect fit." Snow White hesitated, glancing at the sun. The dwarfs would not return for hours. Surely there was no harm in trying ribbon. She stood, and the peddler stepped behind, wrapping a ruby-red lace around her bodice. "How soft," Snow White murmured. "Tighter for poise," whispered the peddler, pulling. That is snug enough." "Nonsense, girl. Beauty thrives in shapely form." She yanked hard. The lace bit deep. Snow White's breath hitched. The world tilted. Colors brightened, then faded. She reached for the apple trunk, fingers scrabbling, but the peddler tugged tighter still. Air would not enter her lungs. A high buzzing filled her ears. She tried to call out, but only a faint squeak escaped. Darkness rushed in, swift as storm clouds swallowing the sun. Snow White crumpled onto the grass. The queen released the lace and stood over her victim, chest heaving from triumph. Snow White's cheeks drained to marble pale, her eyes closed, lips parted soundlessly. The queen bent, touched a finger to the girl's pulse, weak, fluttering, almost finished. She pressed the lace once more, knotting it with final cruelty. "Farewell, fairest," she snarled. "The mirror will name me again." She turned, seized her basket, and shuffled from the yard. At the gate, she glanced back only once. Snow White lay motionless beneath the apple leaves, hair spilled like ink on green cloth. Satisfied, the queen hurried toward the pass, eager to resume her rightful face before moonrise. Even so, the forest did not stay silent. The bluebirds who had circled earlier now swooped down, chirping frantic distress calls. A red squirrel raced up the ridge, chattering warnings. A stag lifted its antlered head, then bounded along the dwarf trail faster than any hound. Far down the mine shaft, Bashful felt a pebble skip across his cap. He looked up to see the stag silhouetted against daylight. It snorted, pawed the ground, and jerked its head toward the cottage path. Doc frowned. "That beast looks bothered." Happy's smile faded. "Something's wrong at home." Without waiting, Grumpy slung his pickaxe, shouting, "Tools down! Move, lads!" They scrambled from the tunnel, dust spilling after them, and raced through the forest. The dwarf song was now a drumbeat of fear. They burst into the clearing and froze. Snow White lay under the apple tree, limbs limp, face white as her name. Birds shrilled overhead. The rabbit thumped the earth. No villain waited. Only the chilling stillness of their friend. Dopey dropped to his knees, tears already shining. "Snow." Doc knelt, fingers to her throat. "Faint pulse," he whispered, voice shaking, laces drawn far too tight. He reached for his knife, but his hands quivered. Grumpy snatched the blade, sliced the knot, and loosened the ribbon. Still Snow White did not breathe. Sneezy hovered, eyes watering, but for once no sneeze came. Bashful wrung his cap in despair. Sleepy bent close and listened. Nothing. "Lift her," Doc commanded. They propped her against the trunk. Grumpy pressed gentle fists against her back while Doc massaged her wrists. Happy blew across her lips, coaxing air. Minutes felt like lifetimes. Then, a flutter. Snow White's chest rose a whisper. Her lashes trembled. She inhaled a shaky gasp. Dopey sobbed with relieved joy. Happy laughed a broken laugh. Even Grumpy's eyes shimmered. Snow White blinked, confused. What happened?" Doc explained softly. "Hiding anger, an old peddler strangled you with a lace." Memory rushed back. She was the queen," Snow White breathed, tears spilling. "She found me." Grumpy slammed his fist into his palm. "We should have left guards." Doc shook his head. "We learned today. Henceforth we stand watch in shifts." They helped her inside, laid her on the settle. Bashful fetched warm broth. Sneezy stoked the fire. Sleepy prepared a lavender compress. Happy wrapped her shoulders with a quilt patterned in bright suns. Snow White gripped their hands. "You saved me. Thank you." "And we'll save you again if need be," Doc vowed. "But first we must prevent need." He turned to Grumpy. "Window shutters, iron bars." "On it," grunted Grumpy, already gathering wood. Dopey hurried outside to retrieve the fallen silk ribbon. He held it up. Even in fading light, it glowed like blood-red danger. Doc examined it, sniffed, recoiled. Poison sewn into the weave. He tossed the lace into the hearth. Blue flames leapt, devouring the cruel beauty until only gray ash remained. Night settled, wrought with sobering lessons. Supper was simple broth. Laughter kept low. Yet as stars pricked the sky, Snow White felt safer than before, not because danger had lessened, but because loyalty had proven stronger. Around her, the dwarfs moved like sturdy shields. Grumpy barred the door. Bashful poured warm cider. Sleepy kept her head propped. Sneezy guarded the window, kerchief ready. Happy hummed a lullaby. Dopey held her hand. And Doc, steady Doc, promised, "We learned how dark her magic can reach. Together we'll light lanterns brighter." Snow White closed her eyes, tired but alive, and the dwarf's watchful presence wove a wall the queen's envy could not breach easily again. Outside, the forest carried whispers of anger, but inside glowed a fiercer power, the steadfast love of 7 small hearts determined to beat for one another, come what may. Chapter 7. The Poisoned Comb. A chill hung in the queen's tower, sharper than frost, though midsummer's sunlight warmed every other roof. She faced her enchanted mirror once more, convinced the laces had done their work. "Mirror, mirror, upon the wall," she whispered, voice cracking with triumph, "who is the fairest one of all?" The silver clouds rolled, but when they parted, the mask-like face did not praise her. Instead, it said in a calm, echoing tone, "Snow White, who dwells in the dwarf's cottage, still shines brighter than any star. She lives, and her beauty is untarnished." The queen's scream rattled tapestries. She swept a crystal goblet from the stand. Shards skittered like beads across stone. How could that girl yet draw breath? Envy, fed one failure, now howled for another chance. "Then I must strike again," she hissed. "I will not rest until the mirror speaks my name alone." She flung open a cedar chest of secret poisons. Vials glowed green, powders shimmered black, but her eyes settled on a small jar of venom distilled from nightshade thorns, a toxin that seeped through skin and traveled straight to the heart. She tipped a single drop into melted beeswax, stirred, and dipped a carved wooden comb into the potion. The teeth drank every glimmer until no trace showed on its polished surface. Rubies and emeralds studded the comb's spine, dazzling even to royal eyes. Any maiden would long to set it in her hair, and one touch to the scalp would steal all breath away. But first, she needed a new mask. The lace peddler guise was useless now. Snow White would flee at any hint of a shawled crone. From her wardrobe, the queen chose a dove-gray traveling cloak and a curled wig the shade of moonlit ash. With a dab of paste, she softened her chin into gentle folds, added faint age spots, and powdered her cheeks a healthy rose. Moments later, the mirror reflected a kindly merchant woman. Silver hair pinned in loops, smile faint but friendly, eyes blurred by spectacles of pink crystal. No suspicion would cling to this figure. She wrapped the jeweled comb in velvet and tucked it into a tray among ordinary hairpins, ribbons, and simple bone combs. Then she set out, choosing a different route, a game trail that wound along a mossy gorge, hidden from the miner's main road. Her heart thudded with hateful purpose. Every fern that brushed her cloak bent, as if withering under her passing. Days after the lace attack, Snow White's strength had nearly returned, though bruises still colored her ribs. The dwarfs fussed over her like hens. Doc measured her pulse each dawn. Grumpy tested shutters. Sneezy stood sentry with a pepper-free handkerchief. Sleepy dozed across the threshold to trip any foe. Bashful practiced brave glares in the looking-glass. Happy polished pickaxe blades until they shone like mirrors themselves. And Dopey shuffled behind Snow White everywhere, arms ready to catch her should she sway. By midweek, the cottage air felt lighter. Stew steamed again, laughter resurfaced, and Snow White insisted they must not neglect their mine. Reluctantly, the dwarfs agreed to resume work, on the strict condition she stay indoors, bar the door, and speak to no stranger. Snow White promised, sealing the vow with pinky hooks all around. So at sunrise, they marched off. Snow White bolted the latch, hummed while washing up breakfast, and felt almost safe. Yet outside, the forest shifted. Jays flew erratic loops, deer stamped uneasily, and the robin who usually sang on the sill perched silent, head cocked to the north. Near midday, a light rap came at the door, not timid like Bashful's knock, nor hearty like Happy's, but delicate, as if a breeze tapped wood. Snow White froze. No visitor was expected. But the rap came again, followed by a gentle voice. Kind mistress, I carry hair goods from distant valleys, ribbons of silk, combs carved from pearl. Might a traveler rest on your bench and show her wares? The voice sounded motherly, nothing like the croak of the lace peddler. Snow White's curiosity stirred. Still, remembering her vow, she called through the door, I thank you, but I cannot buy today. Merely look, dear, coaxed the voice. A gift costs nothing, and I have a comb fit for a princess. One glance will lift your spirits. Snow White hesitated. A gift? How rude to slam a door on kindness. She slid the lattice shutter aside and peered through. There stood a gray-haired woman in a neat cloak, spectacles sliding down her nose, tray of sparkling trinkets hanging from a ribbon around her neck. She looked neither crooked nor menacing, more like a village aunt on market day. Snow White's soft heart tipped the scale. She unbarred the door but left it open only a crack. You may show it through the gap. Oh, let me fasten it properly, the merchant urged. It glitters best against dark hair. She lifted a jeweled comb. The gemstones caught sunlight, scattering firefly flashes. Snow White gasped at the beauty, forgetting caution. The old woman smiled sweetly. One moment, dear, and your brightness will dazzle every bird in the wood. Against her better judgment, Snow White opened wider and stepped onto the porch. The woman moved behind her with surprising swiftness, slid the comb into Snow White's glossy locks, and pressed the teeth against her scalp. A single heartbeat later, pain flared like icy needles. Snow White's limbs locked. Her lungs froze mid-breath. She tried to cry out, but her tongue stiffened. Vision blurred, edges dimming to gray. The woman's image warped. Her gentle smile curdled into something sharp. Snow White's knees buckled. She would have fallen had the queen not steadied her, gloating. Mirror, mirror, never lies, the queen whispered, reverting to her own familiar hiss now that secrecy no longer mattered. At last, your life is mine. Snow White's gaze fixed on the sky. Clouds drifted soundless, as if from another world. Darkness pulsed inward, and thought slipped away. The queen tugged the velvet hood deeper over her disguise and hurried off the porch. She vanished among spruce shadows, confident the poison would finish its work within minutes. This time, she told herself, there would be no dwarfs soon enough to save the girl. She turned down the gorge trail, already savoring the mirror's praise. But fate has little respect for villainous schedules. A rock slide blocked the main mine shaft that morning, forcing the dwarves to abandon work early. Spooked squirrels chittered madly, and Bashful insisted he smelled something odd, like danger scent. So they marched home before noon. Dopey, leading, spotted Snow White slumped across the threshold, eyes glassy, breath shallow. The comb glittered wickedly among her curls. Snow! Snow! He wailed, waving frantic arms. Doc knelt, heart pounding. Poison through the scalp. He diagnosed at once. Remove the source. Grumpy gripped the comb, but fear of hurting her stilled his hand. Sneezy's fingers shook. Happy whispered, Courage, brother. With a deep growl, Grumpy yanked the comb free. A thin line of blood welled. The gems dulled as if their evil drained away. Snow White's body convulsed, once, twice, then stilled. Her chest remained motionless. Doc pressed an ear over her heart. No beat. He began thumping gently, counting under his breath while Bashful fanned cool air and Sneezy fetched smelling salts. Sleepy, now wide awake, ran for the spring with a dipper of mountain water. At the 13th beat, a faint pulse fluttered. Doc exhaled. He tipped water over Snow White's lips. Droplets rolled down, carrying toxin residue away. Slowly her chest rose in a ragged breath. Color crept back into her cheeks like dawn edging night. Eyes opened, unfocused first, then settling on 7 anxious faces. "Queen, again," she whispered. "Aye, and next time we'll be ready," Grumpy vowed, smashing the comb beneath his boot. It cracked, gemstones scattering like tears across the porch. Doc helped Snow White inside and laid her on the settle. He applied salve to the tiny wound, wrapped her head in a bandage dotted with lavender oil, and ordered bed rest. Happy brewed chamomile. Dopey brought a basket of daisies. Sneezy lit a sage bundle to clear poison vapors. Bashful sat guard at the window with a polished pan that doubled as mirror and shield. That night, no stories were told. Instead, the dwarfs crafted stronger safeguards. Grumpy hammered iron hooks into door and shutters. Sleepy strung jingle bells across the threshold so even a cat's step would ring. Doc mixed antidote tonics to keep at hand. They agreed never to leave Snow White alone again, even if mines collapsed or gems glittered in open veins. She protested weakly, but the sight of the shattered comb silenced further argument. Before sleep, Doc addressed them all. "The queen's cunning grows with each failure. We must match her with vigilance and cleverness." His usually gentle voice rang like a drum. Each dwarf nodded solemnly. Their family had nearly lost its heart twice. A third blow must find them a fortress, not a cottage. Snow White, drifting into healing sleep, felt rough hands squeeze hers. Sneezy's calloused palm, Bashful's trembling fingers, Grumpy's firm grip hiding worry, Dopey's unexpected gentleness. Tears pricked her eyes, not of fear but of fierce affection. She understood now. Love was not delicate. It was stone strong, iron forged, willing to stand between breath and poison. Outside, owls hooted through pine shadows. Far away, the queen hurried toward her castle, unaware her second plot lay shattered like gem chips on a porch. She believed victory at hand, and for a few more hours she would savor that illusion. Yet in the humble Riverstone cottage, new defenses glittered brighter than any crown. And while danger crept ever closer, hope, tended by 7 stout hearts, burned hotter still, preparing to meet the darkness head-on when it came again. Chapter 8. The Ruby-Red Apple. A blood-red moon climbed over the castle turrets, staining every slate tile the color of old garnets. In her tower, the queen kindled a brazier at the window arch, letting its smoke curl straight into moonlight. Tonight would be her final strike. Twice the child had escaped, but a third chance belonged to fate, and she would shape that fate with her own hands. She unrolled a crumbling scroll of poison lore and gathered the ingredients its faded ink demanded. First came a raven's heart, still warm, laid upon a silver plate. Next, 6 drops of wolfsbane sap, squeezed from violet stems that withered to ash as soon as they bled. Then a single scale from a serpent that shed its skin only under eclipsed skies, ground fine with an obsidian pestle. Into the brazier she dropped each offering, murmuring syllables too ancient for daylight. Crimson smoke spiraled upward, licking at the moonlight like greedy tongues. Last, she brought forth a perfect apple picked from the royal greenhouse, a fruit already blushed ruby on one side, palest gold on the other. Holding a bone-hued needle, she pierced the red half with tiny holes and set the apple in the plume of venomous smoke. The flesh drank in the fumes, darkening by slow degrees until the red grew deeper than dried blood. The gold half she shielded behind her cloak so it would remain untouched, safe, proof for any doubter that the apple held no harm. When the moon reached its zenith, the queen drew the apple out. A thin band of mottled brown ran exactly along its midline, dividing death from innocence. "Half a bite is all I need," she whispered, tucking the fruit into a straw basket beside half a dozen ordinary apples for disguise. She slid a homespun gown over her fine chemise, donned a threadbare bonnet, dusted soot across her cheeks, and studied the mirror one final time. It showed an older farm wife, stooped from orchard labor yet sturdy enough to carry a heavy basket. No hint of royalty glimmered in those tired eyes. With the dawn she departed, taking the hidden smuggler's gorge once more. Storm clouds massed, but she moved quickly, sure-footed on goat paths, clutching the basket as though it carried her own beating heart. In her mouth swirled a single mantra: one bite, one breath, no more Snow White. That same dawn found Snow White kneeling in the dwarf's vegetable patch behind the cottage, tugging weeds between rows of cabbages. 3 full weeks had passed since the poisoned comb, and though bruises lingered faintly on her skin, strength shone once more in her eyes. The dwarfs had not left her unprotected since that day. 2 always remained to guard while 5 mined, and woodland creatures kept secondary watch from tree and burrow. Today, Happy and Bashful stayed behind, mending the chimney cap and whistling a new tune that mixed bashful hummed notes with Happy's bright trills. Doc had insisted on this rotation. Fresh air, he claimed, sped healing better than any tonic. Snow White smiled at the sound and murmured thanks to the earthworms each time she uncovered one, relocating them gently to softer soil. The morning drifted past in peaceful rhythm. Hoe scrape, bird call, distant hammer taps from Bashful's careful repairs. Around midday, as shadows shortened, a scent of ripe fruit floated over the garden wall. Snow White looked up to see an unfamiliar woman making her way along the lane, a stout farm wife in faded calico, basket hooked over her arm. Behind her trotted a shaggy pony pulling a tiny cart of burlap sacks. The woman paused at the gate. "Fair day to you," she called, voice warm as midsummer. "Might a traveler offer fresh orchard fruit in trade for cool water?" Happy poked his head round the chimney bricks, eyes narrowing. Stranger visits were rare since the Queen's last trick. "We've plenty apples of our own," he answered cautiously. "These are the first of the High Ridge harvest," the woman said, lifting the basket lid. "Sweet as honey, crisp as frost." The ordinary apples on top shone golden red in the sun, tempting even from a distance. Among them, the poisoned apple sat innocently, its deadly half turned away. Snow White stood, wiping soil from her palms. She felt curiosity but also remembered her promise. "I am grateful, good wife," she said, "yet we cannot buy today." "No coin needed," the woman said quickly. "A taste will tell you what my orchard's worth. 1 bite, that's all I ask." She selected a plain golden apple, raised it to her own lips, and bit with a satisfying crunch. Juice trickled down her chin. She laughed lightly. "See? Harmless and delicious." The display eased Snow White's worry, and Bashful, watching from the porch, shyly touched Snow White's sleeve. "Maybe we could trade a jar of honey?" Happy scratched his beard. "She did prove they're good." He called to the woman, "Show us the rest then." With an encouraging nod, Snow White opened the gate. The farm wife stepped forward, lifting the poisoned apple high. "Ah, this one," she rotated it so only the golden side showed, "is the prize of my orchard. Have you ever seen such color?" Indeed, the fruit gleamed as though dew kissed. Snow White felt her mouth water. Still, caution tugged her sleeve. "So lovely," she said, "but I promised my friends not to take gifts. Perhaps a token nibble." "Of course." The farm wife's eyes sparkled. "Try this harmless side." She rasped a small clasp knife across the skin, shaving just the thinnest sliver from the golden half, and popped the slice into her own mouth. "Perfect." She cut a second slice from that same safe half and offered it on the blade tip. Snow White hesitated, then accepted. The piece crunched beautifully, sweet and tart all at once. No pain followed, no dizziness. She smiled in delight. "Exquisite. I taste mountain rain and sunshine. The farm wife bowed. Take the whole apple, dearie. Share with your friends. Happy, still skeptical, muttered, Maybe let me take first chomp of that side. Snow White laughed. You shall. She turned toward him, holding the apple, golden half up. In doing so, she unknowingly flipped the ruby half toward her own lips. The queen's eyes flashed beneath her bonnet, but she schooled her smile. A jay screeched overhead, an urgent, rattling cry that made Bashful start. Listen, he whispered, but Snow White was already laughing again, amused by Happy's mock growl of hunger. Just one true bite, and you may finish the rest, she teased, lifting the apple. Happy bounded from the porch, but he was several steps away when Snow White set her teeth into the fruit, deep, right through the dividing line, sinking into the crimson flesh steeped in venom. Instantly cold shot through her mouth, down her throat, out to every fingertip. The apple slipped from her hand, rolling into a patch of mint. Her knees buckled as if the earth had turned liquid. Shock painted her face with terror. She gasped once, soundless, and fell amid cabbage leaves. Bashful shrieked her name. Happy sprinted, catching Snow White just before her head met stone. Wind hissed through the garden as if the forest itself sucked in a horrified breath. Above them, the stranger's kindly mask twisted into an exultant sneer. She threw the basket to the ground, apples scattered like marbles. Happy's eyes widened. The queen! But Bashful, usually shy, found sudden courage. He hurled the honey jar he'd fetched for trade. Glass smashed against the queen's shoulder, splattering her gown with amber. She hissed, spinning to flee, but the sticky weight slowed her steps. She bolted toward the lane where her pony waited. Happy knelt, cradling Snow White. Her skin already cooled, lips purpled. No heartbeat pulsed beneath his trembling hand. Inside the cottage, bells strung across the threshold jangled wildly, their alarm for Doc, Grumpy, and the others far down the mine path. But help might arrive too late. The queen urged her pony into a gallop, heart hammering with savage triumph. Behind, she heard Bashful's frantic cries for Snow White to breathe. But the girl never would. The mirror would finally yield, and every star in heaven would reflect only the queen's own transcendent beauty. She reached the ridge, spurring the pony up a stony slope. Thunder grumbled across distant peaks. Yet even jubilation could not warm her honey-spattered shoulder. The substance clung like guilt. Back in the garden glade, Bashful shook Snow White's shoulders. "Wake up, please!" Happy knelt helplessly. Tears streamed down his cheeks. From the porch, the jay screeched again and launched into the sky, winging toward the mine road. Within minutes, though they felt like lifetimes, Doc, Grumpy, Sneezy, Sleepy, and Dopey burst through the trees, tools forgotten. They saw Snow White limp in Happy's arms and froze, horror etched on every face. Doc dropped to his knees beside her, fingers seeking pulse where none beat. He eased her onto the earth, tilted her head, and pressed 2 breaths into her lungs. Grumpy pounded her sternum with measured force. Dopey counted aloud through sobs. Sneezy, barely holding back explosive sneezes, fetched cold spring water to dab her brow. Sleepy, eyes wide awake, fanned her cheeks with his hat. Minutes dragged. Nothing changed but the wind, stirring her hair. Doc's resolute count faltered, his eyes brimmed. "We may be too late," he whispered. "No," Grumpy growled, striking her back once more, not letting her go. But the poison was crafted by a master. No dwarf strength nor simple remedy could undo its grip. At last, Doc slumped, exhausted. The dwarfs knelt in a circle around Snow White's still form, grief weighing them down heavier than any cart of gems. Happy's shoulders shook. Bashful hid his face. Sneezy let his tears fall unchecked. Dopey stroked her hair, whispering nonsense lullabies. Even Grumpy's chin quivered as he bowed his head. Above, the sky darkened though the sun still shone, a sudden eclipse of clouds as though nature itself mourned. Flower petals drifted from the apple tree, covering Snow White in delicate white confetti, stark against her dark curls. The dwarfs did not notice when a single blossom landed upon her lips and rested there, like a final kiss. At that moment, in a tower miles away, the queen reached her mirror and demanded its verdict. Silver clouds swirled, merging into the blank mask. The voice echoed, "You, O queen, are fairest of all." Satisfaction surged through her veins like hot wine. She laughed, a sound colder than any winter wind. Back in the dwarf garden, silence deepened. Only birds kept vigil, perching in growing numbers along fence rails and branches, eyes bright and still. The dwarfs rose one by one, lifting Snow White as gently as crystal. Together they bore her into the cottage, unaware that the tale of the ruby-red apple had reached the chapter of deepest night, a chapter whose only light would now depend on hope and on hearts steadfast enough to wait for dawn no mirror could predict. Chapter 9. A Vigil of Love. The dwarfs moved as if inside a dream of glass and sorrow. They could not bury Snow White beneath dark earth. Her light seemed too pure for shadows, so they resolved to encase that light where they could still see it and keep it safe. Deep in their gem caverns, they chose the clearest quartz they had ever mined, flawless as winter ice. Day after day, the seven labored. Doc calculated angles. Grumpy chipped away rough edges with patient fury. Bashful polished each panel until his shy reflection vanished. Happy sang quiet, trembling songs to steady their hands. Sleepy held lanterns when night found them still working. Sneezy etched delicate vines along the seams between sneezes that rattled the cavern walls, and Dopey fetched water to cool the chisels, tears mingling with the runoff. When the coffin at last caught the torchlight, it glowed like a captive sunrise. They carried it to the garden glade and laid Snow White within, arranging her dark hair like a river over silk pillows, folding her hands atop a single white rose. Even in death, her cheeks held a whisper of warmth, as though she might wake at any breath. The dwarfs sealed the crystal lid, yet left one narrow vent beneath the carved rose so the forest's breath could pass through. Then they built a dais of pine logs, lashed with braided ivy, beneath the apple tree whose blossoms had covered her. The woodland creatures gathered first, those same friends who had once helped bake pies and hang laundry. Squirrels sat in solemn rows. Bluebirds perched along the branches in a blue-feathered choir muted by grief. The shy badger curled at the foot of the dais like a sentry carved from fur. At nightfall, fireflies drifted among the ferns, pinpoints of gold weaving wordless lullabies. Days slid into weeks. The dwarfs kept a steadfast watch, taking turns on a carved stool at her side. They spoke little, but their presence wove an unbroken circle of love around the crystal casket. Each dawn, Doc pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, not expecting a pulse, yet compelled by habit and hope. Each dusk, Dopey stroked the glass with a cloth until it shone for the moon. When autumn winds rattled the mountain passes, rumors spilled downriver to distant villages. A princess sleeping in crystal, guarded by 7 miners whose sorrow could bend iron. Travelers who disbelieved came to see, and left with tears, spreading the tale farther, over trade routes, through castle courts, beyond the line where maps turned blank. Some brought candles and left them burning among the moss. Others whispered prayers or tucked wildflowers into the ivy lashes. None dared disturb the dwarf's vigil, for grief can wield a more fearsome power than any sword. Winter arrived on silent paws. Snow sifted through branches, veiling the coffin in white lace. The dwarfs raised a peaked roof of pine boughs above the dais and kept a brazier glowing nearby. Often they found rabbit tracks pressed into the snow around the bier, as if the creatures counted themselves among the watchers. On the coldest nights when sap froze solid, the dwarfs worried frost might cloud the crystal. But each dawn the quartz remained clear, warmed somehow from within by Snow White's unfaded grace. Then came spring again. Buds burst against gray bark. Meltwater sang under the ice. One morning, Sneezy's tremendous "Ah-choo!" startled a pair of deer, and startled him too, for he hadn't sneezed all winter. Bashful blushed because a brace of violets he'd planted beside the bier bloomed brighter than the ones he'd tended in pots. Happy managed a genuine laugh for the first time in months. Yet they did not forget. Their vigil simply shifted from the hush of snow to the hum of bird song, and still the stool beside the coffin never stood empty. Seasons turned like pages. Summer layered emerald leaves above the crystal roof. Autumn painted them copper and gold. Winter laid its white quilt again. 3 full cycles of the sun bowed to the steadfastness of 7 hearts. During that span, the story of the sleeping princess threaded into ballads sung by minstrels around far-off hearths. Sailors whispered it as lucky omen before dawn departures. Shepherds murmured it to calm lambs in storms. Some tales claimed she awaited true love's kiss, others that angels would bear her away on the 7th snow. Yet the most faithful version lingered closest to the truth. 7 dwarfs loved her so sincerely that they kept her safe until the world learned love enough to wake her. Inside the cottage, meanwhile, life continued, smaller, quieter, but present. The beds remained side by side, though no one had heart to push them together anymore. Grumpy still chopped wood, cursing knots. Doc still polished spectacles even when no reading lay ahead. Happy baked honey cakes on the anniversary of her arrival and placed them in a basket beneath the apple tree for passing animals. Sleepy patched their jackets in the hush before dawn. Bashful rewove the bells across the door, though danger seemed moot. Sneezy tended rows of chamomile and mint, believing sweet scents might reach Snow White through that single vent in the coffin. Dopey gathered quartz chips from the mine to scatter around the dais so the moonlight fractured into gentle rainbows each night. Hope lived mostly in small things, in the way Happy still hummed hi-ho under his breath, slow but steady, in the extra quilt Grumpy laid over Snow White's glass when wind howled. In the flame, Doc lit at sundown beside the bier, a stub of beeswax that burned to nothing by dawn, replaced nightly. They told themselves the candle was, so she would never wake to darkness, but secretly each believed that if her eyelids fluttered, they would see the flame tremble first. One autumn evening, as leaves skittered like copper coins across the clearing, a party of strangers arrived. Messengers from a northern barony, chasing rumors of a princess preserved in crystal. Their leader bowed respectfully. "We have heard tales of incomparable kindness," he said, "and we wish only to pay tribute." The dwarfs, wary, allowed them to approach. The strangers left behind a carved cedar box filled with blankets for winter and promised to tell others of the dwarfs' devotion. After they departed, Grumpy grumbled about folks, turning grief into fireside gossip. But later that night, he tucked one of the blankets around Snow White's casket roof, whispering thanks. Thus her story fanned beyond mountains, carried by tongues quick to share wonder, of how she had thanked mice for crumbs, how she sang bedsheets brighter, how she forgave a huntsman at knife edge and blessed a forest with gentleness. Each retelling grew her legend, and legends, like seeds, wait for the right wind. In distant realms, princes and princesses, knights and shepherd girls all dreamed of the maiden in glass and pondered what power, beyond envy and poison, might reach her. Back in the glade, night after night, the candle burned. Doc dozed on the stool, quill poised above a ledger where he recorded temperature, moon phase, and the exact hue of Snow White's cheeks. Still a soft blush, he noted, as if sunlight kissed the glass from within. When the wick guttered low, Dopey would pad forward barefoot, breath held to light a new taper from the dying flame. That tender relay felt to each dwarf like passing a torch of hope itself. Hope, though faint, has a curious endurance. It glows in the ember even after the log appears ash. It nestles in seeds asleep beneath snow, waiting for thaw. It flickers in a candle renewed every dusk by hands that refuse to admit final night. And so the dwarfs kept watch, season after season, believing love could defy even a poison crafted beneath a blood moon. They believed because to stop believing would be to betray the very kindness Snow White had shown them. And kindness, they knew now, was the most unbreakable stone in any mountain. Above the sleeping princess, the apple tree passed through its cycles too. Buds, blossoms, fruit, and bare, each stage dropping petals or shade upon the crystal lid. And each time something touched that glass, it reminded the watchers that the world kept moving, turning, carrying fresh chances, fresh dawns. They would be here when one of those dawns decided it was time for waking. Until then, their vigil of love held firm, 7 small figures and a congregation of silent creatures gathered among eternal ferns, guarding a light that, though dimmed, had never truly gone out. Somewhere in that hush, just behind the ticking seasons, the promise of breath waited, patient as the stars, ready to stir the candle flame when the hour finally came. Chapter 11. Awakening. Prince Leander of the Western Highlands had never intended to wander so far from the cobbled trade road. He had set out with 2 escorts to visit a border barony, but spring storms toppled oaks across the trail, and swollen streams stole every familiar landmark. After a hard night beneath dripping firs, the prince found himself alone. His guards gone ahead to seek help, his horse lamed by a stone bruise. Dawn revealed only an endless green maze, and the prince, though a seasoned rider, felt suddenly very small beneath those towering pines. While searching for a break in the ridges, he met an old woodcutter mending a snare. The man spoke of a marvel hidden somewhere in the depths, a princess lying in a coffin of crystal, watched night and day by 7 grieving miners and an army of beasts. They say her kindness keeps winter gentle and birds singing, the woodcutter whispered, eyes bright with awe. She sleeps like snow under sunlight, never melting, never fading. The story tugged at a memory deep in Leander's mind. Olive-skinned girl laughing in palace gardens, passing him a sugared plum before attendants whisked her away. He had been only 9, but he never forgot the warmth of her smile. With quiet resolve, he followed the woodcutter's directions, north until the granite tooth, east where the river forked like spread fingers, then upward through fern-choked gullies. All morning he walked, pony's reins in hand, until birdsong abruptly stilled. Sunlight, breaking through ragged clouds, spilled onto a small meadow as bright as a chapel nave. At its heart rose an apple tree in full bloom, ivory petals drifting like slow snow. Beneath the branches stood a low pine-roofed shelter, and on a dais within, something glimmered, clear as ice, bright as dawn. Leander halted, bowing instinctively. 7 figures ringed the crystal coffin, stout, bearded, and wary. One, spectacles flashing, stepped forward with a miner's pick resting across his shoulder. "State your purpose, traveler," Doc called, voice firm but not unfriendly. Leander slipped his sword from its sheath and laid it on the grass, palms open. "Only reverence brings me here. I have heard tales of the maiden you guard. If she is indeed the Princess Snow White, I once knew her as a child, and I would pay my respects." Grumpy's eyes narrowed. "Respect's fine, but lots of folks come just to gape." The prince nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Allow me one look, then I will leave in peace." Doc consulted the others with a glance. After 3 years of sorrow, they had learned to read each other's hearts without words. Finally, he gestured Leander closer. With careful steps, the prince approached. Through the flawless quartz, he saw her, black hair fanned over satin, lashes resting on cheeks faintly tinted like pale rose petals. A white rose lay between her folded hands. Candlelight, freshly lit for evening, twinkled on the coffin walls, surrounding her in mellow gold. The sight stole Leander's breath, for in the stillness he recognized the same gentle grace that had once handed him a sugared plum. "Snow White," he whispered, voice catching like a harp string plucked too hard. Dopey, seeing tears in the stranger's eyes, edged nearer, curiosity softening his wariness. The prince swallowed. "Good sirs, may I tell you what I recall?" They nodded. Leander spoke of that brief childhood meeting, how Snow White had offered sweets to every palace page, even him, a visiting lordling shy and far from home, how her laughter had sung through the courtyard fountains. Happy's round face trembled with emotion. Bashful wiped away a tear he pretended was a speck of dust. When the prince finished, silence pooled. At last, Sleepy murmured, fully awake for once, "Kindness remembers kindness." Leander took a steadying breath. "I carry her memory still, and I carry resources that might honor her. In my father's realm stands a chapel of crystal and song, tended by healers and scholars of rare arts. If you would entrust her to me, I will bear her there with utmost care. Perhaps wisdom unknown here might discover a cure." Doc sighed. "We have watched 3 turnings of the year for such hope, yet none came." He looked to the others. Sneezy nodded, eyes watering not from pepper but grief. Grumpy scowled but offered no objection. The prince's earnest humility and the gentle way he spoke Snow White's name stirred something long quiet in their chests, the temptation to believe again. Doc turned back. "Very well, but we march beside you, all 7. "Gladly," Leander said, relief lighting his features. "My pony can pull a cart. We'll pad the crystal with lamb's wool." They set to work. Grumpy fetched sturdy saplings. Happy lashed them into a sledge. Dopey lined the frame with soft blankets supplied by passing pilgrims. Bashful scattered fresh petals inside the cart. "So she rides on flowers," he whispered. Sneezy hammered dowels between rails while holding back sneezes with heroic effort. Soon all was ready except the lifting. Together, prince and dwarves. They grasped the crystal edges. Moonlight filtered through budding leaves, dappling the glass. Slowly they raised the coffin, steady as stonemasons yet gentle as nurses. As they slid it onto the sledge, one side dipped an inch. Not far, but enough. Inside, Snow White's head tilted, lips parting. A brittle, blackened sliver, no larger than a sunflower seed, shifted from the corner of her mouth and slipped through the vent carved beneath the rose. It fell in silence, landing on a petal strewn across the wool. Doc froze. "Wait, did you see?" Leander's gaze followed his finger. The shard lay glinting, red-stained, sinister. Grumpy snatched a twig, scooped it up, and flung it toward the brazier's coals. A tiny hiss, like a dying snake, rose as the fragment incinerated. For one suspended heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Dopey squeaked, pointing inside the glass. Color, barely perceptible, seemed to bloom in Snow White's cheeks. Her chest, so long still, lifted the smallest fraction. "Did she?" Bashful choked. Doc pressed both palms to the lid, eyes wide behind spectacles. A second faint breath fogged the crystal ever so slightly. The dwarfs looked from the coffin to the prince, to each other, as if fearing to wake from a too sweet dream. "Do not move her further," Doc commanded, voice trembling with both authority and hope. "Set her down, gentle as dawn." They eased the coffin back upon the pine dais. Leander knelt, hands splayed on the glass, daring not to hope too loudly. Snow White's lashes quivered like tiny moth wings. Another wisp of air touched the lid. Grumpy's mouth worked, searching for his usual growl, but no sound came. Happy pressed hands to his cheeks, tears rolling freely. Sneezy's held breath finally exploded in a sneeze that startled sparrows from the branches. Even that could not spoil the wonder. Doc lifted shining eyes. The fragment must have lodged in her throat all this time, keeping the poison alive. Now it's gone. They waited, hardly blinking. A robin landed atop the coffin roof, tilted its head, then burst into a jubilant song unlike any it had sung for 3 long years. Snow White's lips parted, and a sigh, soft as feathers, escaped. The prince bowed his head, whispering a prayer of grateful astonishment. The dwarfs edged closer, forming the circle they had kept so faithfully. Only now the air hummed not with grief, but with a fragile, dawning joy. Night deepened around the clearing, but within the crystal coffin a faint flush glowed, promise of sunrise long delayed. And though none dared speak the word miracle, each felt it stir in the beating of their hearts, in the robin's song, in the perfumed air that finally reached Snow White's sleeping breath. Chapter 12. Forever After Lullaby Farewell. The dawn that followed Snow White's awakening felt as if an entirely new sun had been lit in the sky. Its beams fanned across the western highlands, gilding every turret of Prince Leander's castle and turning banners of rose red and liquid gold into glowing ribbons that fluttered high above the gate. Garlands of wildflowers, violets for the dwarf's forest, mountain lilies for Snow White's valley, and blushing tea roses for the Queen Mother, draped the stone arches in fragrant color. Long, silken streamers shimmered over the courtyard, drifting on breezes like friendly dragons of cloth and light. Musicians tuned lutes beside fountains. Stable boys braided blossoms into the manes of white horses. Everywhere, hearts beat a little quicker, as if all living things had been invited to a celebration larger than any single realm. Inside the great hall, Snow White stood before a polished mirror, a kinder-looking glass than the one that once ruled her fate, while attendants fastened a gown the color of soft moon glow. The bodice was stitched with thread spun from the dwarf's finest silver ore, and at her waist lay a belt of 7 gems: emerald, ruby, sapphire, topaz, amethyst, crystal, and smoky quartz, each chosen by a different pair of caring hands. Snow White had begged that no jewel be larger than a robin's egg. Sparkle, she said, should never outshine sincerity. Yet when she stepped onto the sunlit balcony, gasps still rippled through the gathered crowd, for kindness has a way of turning simple beauty into something radiant. Prince Leander met her beneath an arbor braided with apple blossom branches. Their vows were spoken in clear voices that carried past battlements and up into the sky, where swallows wheeled as if signing witness upon the blue parchment of noon. The archbishop pronounced them husband and wife. Trumpets leapt, bells sang. Just then a peal of distant thunder rolled over the far eastern peaks, low, final, and oddly triumphant. Couriers would later bring confirmation. The queen's reign of vanity had ended. In her fury, she had chased a phantom reflection to the edge of her own battlements. Fate, and the laws she had scorned, saw justice done. No cheer rose for that news, but many breathed easier knowing envy's shadow had at last fallen away. Afternoon unfolded into feasting on the lawn. Snow-white tablecloths billowed above trestles piled with orchard pies, crystal pitchers of honey-sweet water, and towers of marzipan sculpted into woodland animals. The 7 dwarfs, Doc in a tailored waistcoat, Grumpy reluctantly polished, Happy beaming brighter than his topaz pin, Sleepy valiantly awake, Bashful nearly hidden behind his carnation boutonniere, Sneezy clutching a pocketful of pepperless kerchiefs, and Dopey twirling in new boots, were seated at the high table beside the prince and princess. When the herald proclaimed them honored lords of the Crystal Guard, all present rose to applaud, showering the miners with silken petals until they looked like stout, surprised rainbows. Their laughter mingled with the crowd's roar, and even Grumpy's habitual scowl blossomed into a grin wide enough to catch crumbs of almond cake. As sunset painted the towers coral and violet, music drifted across the inner bailey. Snow White invited each dwarf to dance. She guided Doc through a stately waltz, spun Happy like a cedar top, coaxed Grumpy into a two-step that left him sputtering but secretly proud, swayed gently with Sleepy beneath paper lanterns, glided in a shy circle with blushing Bashful, skipped a lively jig with kerchief-waving Sneezy, and finally clasped Dopey's hands for a child-quick whirl that drew delighted cheers. No court chronicler could decide which partner glowed brightest. The answer, whispered by anyone with truthful eyes, was all of them at once. When night settled, torches flickered along parapets and fireflies stitched glittering seams above the hedges. Snow White's first decree as princess asked that every remaining pastry be wrapped for the city's orphanage, every ribbon spared for tomorrow's market, every lantern given to sailors watching for home. Prince Leander added his voice, promising new roads to the hinterlands and scholars' stipends for miners' children. Thus, the kingdom's marriage to kindness was sealed as firmly as the couple's own. The weeks that followed only deepened the realm's bloom. Snow White visited infirmaries with baskets of foxglove tea and stories that set broken soldiers smiling. She opened the palace greenhouse to village gardeners so rare seeds could grace humble plots. When the first winter frost threatened the valley's beehives, she recruited Happy, Sleepy, and half the royal guard to drape warm tarpaulins across every apiary. Honey yields tripled the next spring. Residents soon spoke of a second sunrise that had come to the highlands, the glow of compassion lighting stone walls from within. Nor were the dwarfs forgotten once court pageantry faded. Doc served on the royal council as master of mines, ensuring tunnels stayed safe and fair wages flowed. Grumpy headed a patrol that taught castle soldiers how to read the language of mountain weather. Happy supervised festival games, his laughter the official measure of satisfactory revelry. Sleepy became royal astronomer's aide. No one else could spend entire nights at the observatory without complaint. Bashful tended the glasshouse orchids, discovering hybrid blooms that bore his name. Sneezy oversaw the herb garden, cultivating feverfew and mint to calm his own storms. And Dopey, beloved by children across the realm, directed the palace puppet theater, spinning shadow light tales where courage wore a floppy hat. Years unspooled like silk thread. Every season, Snow White and the prince traveled back to the dwarf's glen, where the crystal coffin still rested empty beneath the apple tree, a testament to both heartbreak endured and hope fulfilled. There they shared stew that tasted of memory and laughter that echoed through pine trunks. Now, dear listener, the castle's high windows glow softer. Musicians pack away lutes. Corridors hush. It is time to let the celebration settle into the gentle quiet of night. Imagine the great hall's torches dimming one by one, leaving only a hearth's orange heartbeat. Picture Snow White herself, candle in hand, walking the guest wings to be sure each traveler's pillow is fluffed, each curtain drawn, each dream invited. Hear her whisper to you, as she once whispered to shy forest creatures, "Rest now. You are safe within these walls of kindness." Outside, a night breeze carries the faintest scent of apple blossoms, though their season has passed, reminding you that good memories never wilt. Feel the blanket around your shoulders, snug as a dwarf's patchwork quilt. Inhale slowly, like Doc counting steady heartbeats. Exhale softly, like Sleepy drifting under starlight skies. If worries try to tug at your sleeve, imagine Grumpy shooing them away with a firm scowl, Dopey chasing after to turn them into harmless bubbles that pop in silvery moonbeams. Allow Happy's laughter, a warm, round sound, to settle near your ribcage, and bashful's gentle smile to smooth your brow. Should a sneeze of doubt threaten, Sneezy offers a crisp linen kerchief perfumed with chamomile, and calm returns. Soon your breathing matches the distant ocean rush of wind in castle cedars. Lanterns along the battlements flicker out, and the kingdom tucks into silence. Snow White stands at her balcony one last moment, gazing over fields that glimmer faintly in starlight. She hums the lullaby that once guided 7 miners along moonlit paths, and her notes float through the air like doves. Those notes drift across miles and minutes until they reach you, quiet, steady, full of promise. Let them wrap you now. Close your eyes. Feel peace settle like soft snow on a quiet hill, layer upon layer until the world is hushed beneath its comfort. Know that kindness keeps watch, as faithful as a candle renewed each dusk. Know that you are loved, exactly where you are, just as you are. Good night, dear dreamer. May your journey beyond this page be gentle, your sleep deep, and your heart forever aware that somewhere, under banners of rose and gold, kindness reigns, and its lullaby is always ready to sing you softly home,